My name is Mylan Shepard. My wife Jean and I arrived here at St. Andrews about a year ago. And we have felt welcome from the moment we set foot in the church. And we feel blessed to be part of a vibrant church family here at St. Andrews. I guess my mother Barbara realized I was a veteran in her way that only she can do, which most of us know. She asked me to do today's homily. My first thought was, I'm not qualified to do this. I've never served in combat. I've never seen the effects of war. I picked up a pistol once in my 5 years of duty in the active services in Europe, and maybe shot 10 or 12 rounds at a target. That's about it. That's my only experience. I did my 5 years commitment after graduating from the United States Military Academy at West Point in the dark ages of 1978. The Cold War was the only thing going on at the time, and while serving in Europe, all we did was practice our planned response. And after we were done with our exercises, we went to the beer halls and drank beer. As I was mulling over in my head over the last few months of what I could possibly say to have some meaning, it dawned on me. I have a therapy dog, Casey. He's a 6-year-old golden retriever that I take to schools, libraries, Chambersburg Hospital, and other hospitals and schools around the area. We're part of a dog therapy organization here in South Central Pennsylvania. On our monthly visits, one of our monthly visits is to the Martinsburg, West Virginia Veterans Administration Medical Center. While visiting our service members, as a West Point graduate and a service member, I have the unique opportunity to spend a few minutes talking to our veterans. Most visits are nice and short. They thank us for coming with our pets, and they tell us about their stories when they were younger and they had dogs themselves, and their stories and experience with their dogs and with their families. While there, we visit the mental health unit, the Alzheimer's unit, hospice, and long-term care units of the medical center with our dogs. Every once in a while, their story about their service to their country, they talk about their service to their country. So today, I finally realized my offering to you today is to share a few of their stories and a few other stories that I've accumulated over the years from my friends and family. Several months ago, I met a World War II Navy veteran. And as he pet Casey, we kidded about the Army-Navy rivalry. He shared with me his service in the South Pacific on the boats bringing our soldiers to the shores during the island hopping campaign. He remembers taking in our soldiers and bringing out the wounded and the dead, and then taking replacements back to fill in the spots that were vacated. He was very proud of his service to do that for our country, and he was proud to be able to serve the Army and the Marines going into battle. I thanked him for his service and saluted him. With a tear in his eye and not much strength in his arm, he saluted me back. You see, he was in a hospice center. He was surrounded by family. I went back a month later with Casey. He was no longer there. It was good. It was a wonderful opportunity to share that moment with him, and that he was surrounded with his family and friends. At a recent visit, I met an Army Vietnam veteran of the 1st Cavalry Division. I know the history of the 1st Cav from my professors at the Academy. I knew he would have seen some of the heaviest fighting, and he shared some stories with me as he rubbed Casey's head. See, it's about the dog. Again, when I visit the vets, and they're rubbing the dog and spending time petting Casey, they open up and they talk to me. We kid about the rivalries, we kid about the Army and the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Air Force, and it comes out. They start talking about their service, they start talking about what it was like for them when they were in service. He would have flown into some very heavy fighting. With not much strength in his voice, he had oxygen tubes, and he could barely move. He took deep breaths in order to tell me about his experiences. His family was there with him, listening to his stories as he was talking to me and Casey. I believe they were not aware of these stories, and they were writing them down as we were talking about it. On another visit, I was able to meet and spend a few minutes with a woman Vietnam veteran who was not able to communicate. She was strapped in a chair, and all she could do was do head nods and motions and all. But by her expression, she enjoyed visiting with Casey. I believe she was a nurse who would have tended to our service members in their time of need. Now, she was being tended to in her time of need. Another World War II veteran, Pet Casey, had told me of his surviving kamikaze attacks on his carrier in the South Pacific. And he told us the stories of putting out fires and watching his shipmates die in the flames. I believe he was on the Yorktown, one of the most famous carriers in World War II. So now I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about some experiences I've had with my neighbors in Pennsylvania area since we moved here. I recently had the unique opportunity to visit the Marine Corps Museum at Quantico, Virginia with my neighbor, Bob. If you ever have an opportunity to go, you should go. It's a wonderful museum, privately funded. The exhibits are just outstanding. Bob is a Marine and a Vietnam veteran. Jean and I met him and his wife about a year ago. His stories of the conflict in Vietnam were interesting, but at the time they were stories, and I heard the stories, but you understand the stories and you acknowledge them. And that's about as far as you go. So basically, when I found out that they were going to the Marine Corps Museum, I invited myself. Here, Army guy going to the Marine Corps Museum. It was quite an honor. So I basically invited myself to tag along with Bob and members of the local Marine Corps League on the recent bus trip to the museum. And you can imagine, I got a lot of ribbing from the other Marines and also the folks at the museum themselves who were giving us the tour. I got some ribbing. But I'll tell you, I knew some of the history as well as some of them knew their own history. Bob and I walked the museum, and during our walk through the different areas, he led me through the Vietnam exhibits. In the Vietnam exhibit, there was a virtual exhibit that you're able to experience as if you were there. Upon entering the exhibit, you walk through the back of a Chinook helicopter, dropping you off on the crest of a hill in the northern sector of South Vietnam during the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive was from January to February of 1968. And this hill was a few miles north of the city of Khe Sanh and a few miles west of the Laos border, just south of the border between North Vietnam and South Vietnam. This hill that we were dropped off on from this helicopter was at the northern sector, protecting South Vietnam from the North Vietnamese. The Tet Offensive was when North Vietnamese threw everything they had at South Vietnam for over a month. This hill that you have just been dropped onto in the back of this helicopter is surrounded. It is where if you were in the actual scene, if you were actually there, you would have been tackled to the ground because there are snipers around and they would have shot you up if they'd have seen you come off that helicopter. In front of you is a cannon in this exhibit, flat tires, artillery shell casings all around, sandbags stacked high. All around your position, you are exposed. You are sitting on a hill by yourself, exposed in your unit. There at the exhibit, there's a mural of the surrounding areas. Bare mountains around you, a downed American helicopter to the one side. There is no vegetation, no trees, no nothing. You are circled and the hills are circling your position and you are surrounded by the enemy. The only way you get food, water, and ammunition supplies is from the helicopters that's just dropped you in. And they'd have to take off and land in a cloud of smoke in order to protect them from snipers. As Bob and I were walking the exhibit, he explains the situation to me in minute detail, down to the sandbags. I realized that cannon and the flat tires on that cannon were Bob's cannon. He was on that hill in 1968. He was a gunnery sergeant in charge of that cannon, with orders to shoot anything that moved on the hills adjacent to him. For over a month, he and his crew stopped attacks from North Vietnamese forces in South Vietnam. This was Bob's story, and I was honored that he would share it with me right there at the museum, at the cannon, at the site that he would have been at in South Vietnam, protecting the border. Another neighbor is Bill, quiet guy. Met Bill about a year ago also. Didn't know much about him until a recent dinner. We attend dinners on Wednesday nights with our neighbors, and Bill and his wife, we shared meals with them probably a dozen or more times over a year. And in the year's time, might have said 2 sentences to Bill. Hi, how you doing? How's everything going? That was about it. But for some strange reason, we were at one of our meals, and of course the women were one end and the guys were at the other end. And there was about half a dozen of us that night, so there was a more intimate conversation. We talked about our life's experiences. And during the conversation, I learned that Bill was a Vietnam vet. He was in 3 aviation companies, and one of his many jobs was as a door gunner on Huey helicopter. He told me of his experience of being in a helicopter, bringing the troops into hot landing zones, and then coming back and bringing them back out at the end of their patrols. His regret was not enough flying hours to qualify for his air wings. I told him you never know if you'd have flown any more of those missions, if you'd still be here today having dinner with us. So we all just sat there and acknowledged that moment. Casey and I start to visit our residents next door at the Episcopal home every other week. And I thank Mary Grace and Kathy for being wonderful hosts for us to be there. We just had a visit this past Monday, and I hope they enjoyed seeing us. We have several veterans residing there, and it's an honor and a pleasure for me and Casey to bring a smile to them and all the residents in a couple times a month that we visit. We miss you this month, Margaret, but we'll be back. We'll be back. My father was a World War II vet and served in the Persian Gulf in the Army. He passed away 10 years ago. My father-in-law is a World War II vet and Korean War vet, served in the Navy. At his eulogy, I spoke at his eulogy, and for the first time in my life, I said, "Go Navy, beat Army," at his eulogy. We just observed his passing 5 years ago this week. So my message is this. According to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs statistics, there are only about 496,000 of the 16 million who served during World War II still alive in 2018. Korean and Vietnam veterans are not far behind. So spend some time with them and listen to their stories. Oral history is important to us as a people and our culture. Their stories are a major part of our history as a people. The power of storytelling strengthens us and gives us a sense of belonging. Our witness to these stories and other stories empower and enliven us. And their stories are of service and sacrifice. Christ taught us through stories, and his stories are passed down generation to generation, and we're still sitting here today, aren't we? Because of those stories. The telling of stories and the listening of stories tells us about who we are and will teach us and strengthen us. So 100 years ago today, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918 marked the end of World War I. It originated as Armistice Day on November 11, 1919, the first anniversary of the war to end all wars. In 1926, Congress passed a resolution for an annual observance, and November 11th became a national holiday in 1938. In 1954, President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a West Point grad, by the way, officially changed the name to Veterans Day. In 1968, the Uniform Holidays Bill was passed by Congress, which moved the celebration of Veterans Day to the 4th Monday in October. I don't know what they were thinking. The law went into effect in 1971, but in 1975, President Gerald Ford returned it to November 11th due to the important historical significance of the date. The 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918. And today, 2018, marks 100 years. Veterans Day pays tribute to all American veterans, living and dead, but especially gives thanks to living veterans who served their country honorably during war and in peacetime. At this time, I'd like all veterans to stand as we thank you for your service. Like families of service members to stand for your support to our soldiers and sailors, airmen and Marines. Thank you. I now request we end with a short prayer. And this prayer is the cadet prayer of the United States Military Academy. So you may think it may not apply. However, I believe there are some parts that we can all live by. Let us pray. O God, our Father, thou searcher of human hearts, help us to draw near to thee in sincerity and truth. May our religion be filled with gladness, and may our worship of thee be natural. Strengthen and increase our admiration for honest dealing and clean thinking, and suffer not our hatred of hypocrisy and pretense ever to diminish. Encourage us in our endeavor to live above the common level of life. Make us to choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong, and never to be content with a half-truth when the whole can be won. Endow us with courage that is born of loyalty to all that is noble and worthy, that scorns to compromise with vice and injustice, and knows no fear when truth and right are in jeopardy. Guard us against flippancy and irreverence in the sacred things of life. Grant us new ties of friendship, new opportunities of service. Kindle our hearts in fellowship with those of a cheerful countenance, and soften our hearts with sympathy for those who sorrow and suffer. Help us to maintain the honor of the Corps untarnished and unsullied, and to show forth our lives the ideals of West Point in doing our duty to thee and to our country. All of which we ask in the name of the great friend and master of all. Amen.
Amen.